The Munich Olympics were supposed to be a celebration of unity, an era of global optimism, a world trying to step away from war and division. But instead, they became the site of a tragedy so devastating that it redefined Israel's security doctrine forever. The morning of September 5th, 1972 was warm, quiet, almost peaceful. Athletes from across the world slept in their village apartments, mentally preparing for the competitions ahead. But at 4:30 a.m., shadows began to move near 31 Connolly Strasse, shadows carrying duffel bags filled not with athletic gear but weapons. 8 members of the Palestinian militant group Black September scaled a fence, disguised as athletes. They carried AK-47s, Tokarev pistols, grenades, and a precise plan. Within minutes, they forced their way into the Israeli team's apartment. Wrestling referee Yosef Gutfreund heard noises near the door and tried to block it with his body, shouting warnings to his teammates. His resistance bought seconds, just seconds, but seconds that saved lives. Some athletes escaped through a rear window while others were captured. By dawn, the world knew 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were being held hostage. What followed was a 21-hour standoff between Black September and German police, an ordeal broadcast live across millions of televisions. Cameras zoomed in on windows. Commentators whispered theories. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone who would talk. And all the while, the terrorists inside the apartment were watching the same broadcasts, adjusting their plans based on German police movements being shown on TV. Everything that could go wrong did. The German authorities, untrained for counter-terror operations, rejected Israel's offers to send in special forces. They attempted a rescue operation at Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base, one that collapsed instantly due to poor planning, miscommunication, and a devastating underestimation of the terrorists' resolve. Shots echoed across the tarmac. Flames consumed a helicopter, and when the smoke cleared, all 11 Israeli hostages were dead. Families collapsed in grief. Israel fell silent. The world looked on in shock. At the funeral, Prime Minister Golda Meir stood before the coffins draped in blue and white. Her voice shook, but her message did not. If we should ever become weak, it would mean our end. The Israeli public demanded justice, not revenge, justice. A response that would make clear that targeting Israeli civilians anywhere in the world would come with a cost. Thus began Operation Wrath of God, a covert campaign to identify and neutralize anyone directly involved in the Munich massacre. And yet, even that wasn't enough. For while Wrath of God pursued the planners, financiers, and coordinators of Black September's operations, there remained 3 high-value figures operating openly in Beirut, protected by armed guards, hidden by political chaos, and confident in their safety. These men were not foot soldiers. They were not middle-ranking operatives. They were the architects of terror inside Lebanon's borders, operating in the heart of a hostile city where Israeli forces were never expected to strike. But Israel had already decided if the world refused to punish the killers of their people, then Israel would bring justice to their doorstep. Across the Mediterranean, behind secure walls and layers of secrecy, a small group of Mossad officials, military generals, and naval commanders began to meet. Their mission was unthinkable. Send Israeli commandos deep into Beirut to eliminate 3 leaders of Black September and the PLO. What would emerge from those meetings would later be known as one of the most daring, flawlessly executed operations in modern military history, Operation Spring of Youth. But at that early stage, before the maps, before the disguises, before the assault teams rehearsed in replica buildings, there was only one question in the room. How? Beirut wasn't just enemy territory. It was the heart of the enemy's capital, a place swarming with militias, secret police, political factions, and foreign intelligence agencies, a city so layered with risk that even entering it was considered nearly suicidal. Yet the targets lived there openly. They believed they were untouchable. One of them, Kamal Nasser, was a charismatic spokesman widely admired in the Arab world. Educated, eloquent, and deeply persuasive, he wielded words as weapons, shaping narratives, influencing public opinion, and giving legitimacy to organizations whose hands were bloodied. Another, Kamal Adwan, was responsible for planning regional operations against Israel. His strategies were clinical, calculated, and often lethal. His apartment served as a nerve center for militant activities. The third was Muhammad Najjar Abu Youssef, a senior planner directly tied to attacks on Israeli civilians. He lived in a well-guarded apartment surrounded by family and layers of security. These men slept each night with confidence, believing Beirut's political landscape made them unreachable. But Israel had already begun to study them, their routines, their movements, their guards, their wives and children, the way they parked their cars, the windows they left open, the lights they turned on, the moments they walked alone. Nothing was too small, nothing was ignored. And the deeper the analysts dug into the details, the clearer one truth became. A direct strike was possible if the operation was planned with absolute precision. The final trigger came from a simple, chilling report. Intelligence confirmed that all 3 targets consistently slept in their apartments every night. That was the opening Israel needed. And now, everything shifted into motion. Deep inside a restricted operations room in Tel Aviv, a red marker circled a date on the board. Generals leaned in. Mossad directors shared updates. Naval commanders discussed tide schedules and moonlight levels. Photographs taken by undercover agents lay scattered across the table, each one revealing fragments of the Beirut neighborhoods the teams would soon infiltrate. Walls once covered in maps of Europe, used for tracking the global hunt for Munich's accomplices, were now dominated by the blueprints of Beirut apartment blocks. Every person in that room understood the stakes. A failure in Munich had cost innocent lives. A failure in Beirut could ignite a regional war. But Israel was not reacting in anger. They were planning with ice-cold discipline. And everything, every detail, every decision was driven by a singular, immovable purpose: bring justice to the men who believed justice would never reach them. And so, as Israel mourned publicly, it began preparing privately for a mission the world would never expect. A mission built on silence, precision, and audacity. A mission that would take Israeli commandos into the most dangerous city in the Middle East. A mission that would change history. In intelligence work, the difference between possible and impossible is usually measured in information. And in the weeks following Munich, Israel's intelligence services began gathering information on Beirut with an intensity the city had never been subjected to before. The Mossad's Keshet surveillance unit had already planted operatives in Lebanon long before 1972. Some posed as European students, others as businessmen, factory technicians, even lovers seeking new lives in Lebanon's thriving nightlife scene. These agents lived double lives, moving through the city with carefully constructed identities, tiptoeing along the thin line between observation and exposure. Now their mission sharpened, mapped the lives of the 3 targets down to the minute. They followed delivery trucks. They learned which stores the guards visited. They charted foot traffic, streetlight outages, cafe hours, and police routines. They observed the paths of children heading to school, the time the bakeries fired their ovens, the interval between garbage trucks and municipal cleaners. Nothing was trivial. Everything was data. One operative noted that every night around 10:15 p.m., a particular side street near Abu Yusef's building went nearly dark for 20 minutes due to a faulty circuit. That small detail would later determine the exact placement of the first assault team. Another agent recorded that Nasser enjoyed stepping onto his balcony at around 11 p.m. with a cigarette. The balcony railing, chipped and uneven, tilted slightly right. That tilt would eventually become a visual landmark for the commandos approaching the building. Piece by piece, the entire operation began crystallizing. But the heart of the plan, the element that would hold the entire mission together, rested on one core challenge. How do you insert dozens of Israeli commandos into the center of Beirut without anyone noticing? The answer lay with the Israeli Navy's elite Shayetet 13 unit. Shayetet 13 wasn't just a commando force. They were ghosts. They prided themselves on being able to appear in places no one expected and vanish before anyone understood what had happened. Their training bordered on the inhuman. Frigid swims, months of infiltration drills, physical punishment that broke most and hardened the few who remained. The Beirut infiltration plan would push even them to their limits. The idea was bold, almost reckless on paper. Approach Beirut by sea in the dead of night. Swim ashore silently. Meet Mossad operatives waiting with civilian cars. Drive straight through the city. Strike 3 targets at once. Escape before Lebanon even realized what had happened. Every detail had to be perfect. At Israel's Atlit naval base, a secluded training ground began to transform. Within days, construction crews recreated entire blocks of Beirut's Rosh and Verdun districts. Storefronts, stairwells, balconies, even the layout of potted plants and laundry lines, all built from photographs smuggled out by Mossad agents. Here, night after night, commanders Ehud Barak, Amiram Levin, Muki Betzer, and their teams rehearsed until muscle memory replaced thought. They practiced entering rooms in total darkness, navigating narrow hallways with suppressed weapons, memorizing stair counts, sprinting through simulated Beirut traffic, identifying doors by scratch marks and paint-peeling, timing each movement to the second. Every rehearsal ended the same way. The teams stood silently around the model building, searching for flaws. A misplaced shadow, a missed angle, a footstep out of rhythm. Barak in particular was relentless. He had an unusual ability to detach emotion from analysis. If something didn't work, he rejected it without hesitation. If something posed unnecessary risk, he removed it instantly. He was cold, analytical, decisive, everything a commander needed to be for a mission like this. He also had one unique advantage. He could disappear into disguise like few soldiers alive. It wasn't a gimmick, it was a talent. Barak studied the way people walked, the way they held cigarettes, the idle gestures of civilians. He could transform himself with a wig, a dress, and a handbag, so convincingly that even other Israelis sometimes didn't recognize him. Golda Meir herself once joked, "If the army ever needs a great actress, Barak is available." For Spring of Youth, Barak would once again disguise himself as a woman, a quiet, short-haired European tourist returning from a night out. This disguise wasn't for show. It allowed him to walk close to guards without raising suspicion. It allowed him to ride in the front seat of a civilian car in the heart of Beirut without a single checkpoint stopping them. Meanwhile, Mossad's undercover agents inside Lebanon began preparing the vehicles. They rented cars from local agencies, mostly Peugeot sedans that blended naturally into Beirut's traffic. They checked tire pressure, engine sounds, brake responsiveness. They filled them with maps, cigarettes, receipts, and radio static that matched a typical Beirut broadcast. The goal was simple: make the cars feel lived in, make the drivers look exhausted, make the passengers forgettable. As the planning intensified, one concern loomed over everything. The city was too unpredictable. Too many factions, too many armed groups, too many variables outside Israeli control. But Mossad found the one thing Beirut did have, a pattern of noise and chaos that created perfect cover. On most nights, the city stayed loud until after 2 a.m. Restaurants full, bars crowded, taxi horns echoing through the streets. The nightlife worked in Israel's favor. Teams dressed as tourists wouldn't stand out. Cars driving late wouldn't draw attention. People stumbling home wouldn't be suspicious. Beirut's beauty, its vibrancy, its nightlife became the camouflage. But there was one final piece of the puzzle, and it was the most delicate: timing. To strike 3 targets located several blocks apart, the teams would need to synchronize their movements with near mathematical precision. They couldn't rely on radios, they risked interception. They couldn't rely on cell signals, they didn't exist. Instead, they rehearsed the timeline down to the second. If Barak's team reached the Abu Yusuf building 30 seconds too early, they risked alerting the guards. If Levin's team reached Kamal Adwan's building a minute too late, Adwan might be awake and armed. If the team targeting Kamal Nasser entered during a passing police patrol, the firefight could erupt into a citywide alarm. Precision wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Israel's cabinet approved the final plan only after months of preparation. Golda Meir listened in silence as commanders presented every step, every escape route, every potential consequence. The risks were staggering. A misstep could trigger a diplomatic crisis, or worse. When they finished, the room fell quiet. Golda tapped her fingers lightly on the table. Then she spoke slowly. "If we do nothing, we invite more Munichs." She paused. "Proceed." And that was it. The mission was now official. The night before the operation, the commandos gathered at an isolated naval pier, quiet and focused. There was no cheering, no speeches, no motivational words. Each man carried the weight of history on his shoulders and the silent knowledge that some might never return. The Mediterranean lay dark and endless before them. The wind was cold, the moon was thin, the air felt heavy with destiny. At 2300 hours, the engines of the missile boats whispered to life. The commandos boarded in silence. In the distance, Israel's coastline faded to a thin line. Ahead, Beirut waited, sleeping unaware that forces from hundreds of miles away were coming for 3 men who believed themselves untouchable. The boats cut through the black water, leaving no wake, no sound, no trace. Israel was moving. Justice was coming, and Beirut had no idea. The Mediterranean crossing took hours, but to the commandos on board, time moved strangely. Both too fast and agonizingly slow. Some stared at the dark horizon, mentally rehearsing every step they had drilled for months. Others sat motionless, eyes closed, saving their energy for the chaos that awaited them. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Far behind them, Israel's coastline had long disappeared. Ahead, the faint shape of Lebanon crept closer with each passing mile. Cloud cover hung heavy over the water, masking the moon and offering the darkness the Israelis needed. Inside one of the missile boats, Ehud Barak sat near the exit ramp, quietly adjusting the final components of his disguise. A wig, a dress, flat shoes, a handbag hiding a compact submachine gun. It was an absurd combination for the most dangerous mission of his career, but that absurdity was precisely what made it effective. The young commando beside him glanced over. "Sir, you look..." Barak cut him off with a tiny smirk. "Don't say it." The mood was tense but controlled. These were not soldiers who panicked. They were elite commandos who had lived through enough near-death moments to understand what fear felt like and how to silence it. On the upper deck, the captain of the naval vessel signaled to his second-in-command, "Prepare for drop point. Quiet engines." The hum of the ship softened to a low vibration. The cooling wind carried the scent of brine and diesel across the deck. The operation was entering its irreversible phase. At exactly 23:47, the first boat reached the designated insertion point just off the Lebanese coast. The waters, dark as ink, rippled gently under the hull. Without hesitation, the divers of Shayated 13 lowered themselves into the freezing sea, their weapons sealed in waterproof bags, their bodies slicing through the surf like shadows. Minutes later, the commandos followed. They eased into the water in near silence, their civilian clothes soaked instantly. Their strokes were measured, steady, efficient, trained movements from years of harsh conditioning. Every push forward brought them closer to enemy shores. In the distance, Beirut glowed faintly under the night sky. Even from miles offshore, the flicker of nightlife was visible. Music from bars, lights from restaurants, movement along the waterfront. Beirut was alive, vibrant, unaware that ghosts were approaching its shores. The swim to land was long, grueling, and icy, but the commandos emerged onto the quiet beach like specters rising from the underworld. They crouched low, peeling off their wet outer layers, retrieving their concealed weapons and radios. Waiting for them on the sand were Mossad operatives who had risked everything to remain embedded inside Beirut for this moment. Their faces were tense, but their voices were steady. "Cars are ready," one whispered. "Keys inside. Routes are clear." 3 rental cars, humble, ordinary Peugeots, sat parked just beyond the dunes. They looked like they belonged to any family coming home late from a dinner out. The Israelis climbed in quickly, their wet clothes sticking to the seats. Hila, the undercover agent posing as a European translator, slid into the driver's seat of the lead car. Her mastery of Lebanese driving habits was invaluable. She merged onto the coastal road with natural ease, not too fast, not too cautious. The other cars followed at staggered intervals, just as rehearsed. As they entered the city, Beirut's nightlife embraced them. Streetlights bathed the roads in a warm orange glow. Cafes were still open, their outdoor seating crowded with young couples smoking and laughing. Taxis honked. Radios played Fairuz songs drifting through the air. The scent of roasted coffee and sea breeze mingled together. To an outsider, Beirut looked peaceful, almost cosmopolitan. But the Israelis in the back seats saw it differently. Every pedestrian was a potential militia scout. Every dark alley held the threat of armed fighters. Every slow-moving car might carry someone capable of blowing the mission apart. Barak adjusted the wig on his head, peering out the window with calculated casualness. His disguise transformed him into a woman who seemed out of place but not suspicious. The illusion was good enough to fool any police officer glancing inside the car. After 20 minutes of driving, Hila turned onto Rue Verdun, the upscale district where Abu Youssef lived. His apartment building stood quietly under the warm glow of the streetlights. The sidewalk was clean, lined with trimmed bushes and marble staircases. Nothing about the building suggested it housed a man responsible for orchestrating the deaths of civilians. Barak stared at the building like a mathematician studying a complex equation. He noted the balconies, the height of the windows, the timing of pedestrians passing by. Everything mattered. Behind them, the second team split off toward Hamra Street, where Kamal Adwan's apartment waited. The third team began snaking through narrow side streets toward the home of Kamal Nasser. 3 targets, 3 buildings, 3 simultaneous strikes. No room for missteps, As the teams approached their respective zones, they communicated using predetermined hand signals and coded whispers. Radios remained silent unless absolutely required. Team Alpha, assigned to eliminate Abu Yusuf, parked half a block away. The commandos exited casually, blending into the small clusters of late-night pedestrians. One soldier pretended to help the old woman, Barak, step onto the curb. Another smoked a cigarette, scanning the street through half-lidded eyes. Inside the building, a narrow staircase spiraled upward to the second floor. Behind the apartment door, Yusuf slept beside his wife. His bodyguards, exhausted from their normal routines, lingered lazily in the hallway. At 1:15 a.m., Barak gave a short nod. The operation began. 2 commandos moved first, approaching the stairwell with silent footsteps. One carried a suppressed pistol, the other a compact submachine gun. They passed the mailboxes, their shadows stretching across the dimly lit entryway. A floorboard creaked softly under their weight. The nearest bodyguard turned his head, but before he could speak, a hiss of air followed by a thud ended his life. The second guard pivoted instinctively, hand reaching for his gun, but 2 rounds struck his chest with dull, muffled thumps. He slumped forward quietly, his hand sliding off the pistol grip. Team Alpha continued upward like a wave of shadows. When they reached Yusuf's apartment, the breacher placed a specialized charge, small, controlled, directional. Barak stood behind him, ready to enter the moment the door blew. With a soft crack, the lock shattered. The door swung open. Inside, chaos erupted. Yusuf jolted awake, reaching instinctively toward the nightstand drawer. His wife screamed, scrambling backward. Flashlights sliced across the room. The commandos moved with frightening speed. A burst of suppressed gunfire ended Abu Yusuf's life before he could rise from his bed. Team Alpha then moved through the apartment with mechanical precision, collecting documents, maps, notebooks, and any materials that might contain intelligence. Every second mattered. The longer they remained, the greater the danger. Meanwhile, across the city, Team Beta prepared to storm the apartment of Kamal Adwan. Their approach was more complex. His building had a doorman, stronger security, and multiple potential escape routes. They approached the rear service entrance exactly as planned. A small bribe earlier that week had ensured the night guard would be looking the other way during this exact window. He turned a blind eye as the Israelis slipped inside. The stairwell leading to Adwan's apartment was dark, narrow, and humid. The team moved upward in tight formation, breathing in controlled rhythm. At the top of the stairway, Adwan sat in his study, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling as he reviewed operational documents. He had no idea death was only seconds away. The assault team breached the apartment with silent efficiency. Adwan reached for his pistol, but the Israelis fired first. He fell backward, papers scattering across his desk. Team Beta secured his files quickly. Blueprints of safe houses, lists of operatives, maps of Israeli towns, notes on planned attacks. It was a treasure trove. And while all of this unfolded, Team Gamma closed in on the apartment of Kamal Nasser, the poet, the philosopher, the ideologue who had armed entire generations with words instead of weapons. Unlike the other two, he was awake. He sat at his typewriter, tapping out a political manifesto. He heard the knock at his door and assumed it was a late-night visitor. When the door opened and he saw the commandos, his face registered understanding. A calm, almost resigned acceptance. He knew why they had come. He didn't beg, he didn't shout, he simply closed his eyes. A single shot ended his life. With all 3 targets neutralized, the teams began the most dangerous phase of the mission, extraction. They exited quickly, merging back into their vehicles, driving through the still busy streets as though they were nothing more than tired Europeans returning from a night out. Behind them, Beirut stirred, the first echoes of suspicion rising like a wave. The Israelis were already gone. The moment the 3 teams slipped back into their cars, Beirut itself seemed to shift. The atmosphere, once warm and careless with nighttime energy, began to tighten, as though the city sensed something had gone wrong. Sheila started the engine of the lead Peugeot. Her hands were steady, but her jaw clenched with tension. She glanced in the rearview mirror, spotting Barak adjusting the wig on his head. The other commandos settled into the back seat, their weapons hidden under jackets and handbags. They looked, for all appearances, like a group of exhausted tourists heading home far too late. But they weren't safe. Not yet. Not even close. The mission wasn't truly complete until they were back in the water, on the boats, and across the Mediterranean. The most dangerous part was still unfolding around them. Across the city, street by street, the other 2 Peugeot sedans moved through Beirut's shifting shadows. The engines hummed at normal speed. No sudden stops, No rapid turns, no gestures that would draw attention. Even their breathing had to stay controlled. Team Beta, fresh from eliminating Kamal Adwan, turned through a narrow alley that led toward the Corniche, the long, curved stretch of coastline where Beirut's evening air carried scents of salt water and fried pastries from late-night food stands. A few young men stood near a parked motorcycle, smoking and laughing. One turned his head as the Peugeot passed, squinting. Had he noticed something? A strange face, a nervous glance. The commandos in the back seat remained perfectly still. The young man exhaled a plume of smoke and turned back to his friends. The Peugeot continued forward. Closer to the Rausch district, Team Gamma navigated the winding streets near the Pigeon Rocks. The area was busier, bars still open, couples strolling along the waterfront. The commandos blended in, their car joining a loose procession of taxis and late-night wanderers. The glowing neon signs reflected across the windshield in reds and blues. But then, a disruption. A Lebanese internal security checkpoint appeared up ahead. Just two officers, half bored, leaning against a jeep. They weren't searching rigorously, but they were stopping cars at random. A bad roll of the dice here could end everything. Team Gamma slowed. One of the commandos swallowed hard. The team leader inhaled, steadying himself. The officer raised his hand lazily, signaling the car to stop. The Peugeot rolled to a halt. For 5 agonizing seconds, the officer stared at the occupants. His eyes moved from the driver to the passengers, 2 men wearing the tired expressions of late-night tourists. The officer waved his hand. "Yalla, go!" They drove forward. No sudden acceleration, no sighs of relief, only controlled, measured movement. When they turned the next corner, only then did the team leader whisper, "Keep going." Meanwhile, at the extraction point on the shoreline, Shayatet 13 divers waited in the cold surf with waterproof radios pressed against their wetsuits. They listened for the coded signal that would indicate Target 1 secured, Target 2 secured, Target 3 secured. Extraction phase initiated, each second stretched like a taut wire. They knew the timing had to be perfect. If one team encountered resistance, minutes could turn into hours. Hours could turn into disaster, and disaster in Beirut spread quickly. Just as one of the divers repositioned his grip on his weapon, a soft crackle came through his earpiece. A coded phrase, then another, then a third. Targets eliminated. The diver relayed the message to the others. They took their positions, scanning the shoreline for movement. Back in the city, a new sound echoed quietly through the night. Sirens. Lebanese police were beginning to mobilize, not because they knew what had happened, but because something felt off. The quiet zones of the city were stirring. Someone had heard a muffled bang. Someone else had heard a scream. A neighbor had glimpsed unfamiliar figures in a hallway. Fragments of alarm began stitching themselves together. Team Alpha approached a roundabout where a police car rested idly. 2 officers sitting inside. Barak lifted his hand slowly to adjust his wig again, maintaining the illusion. The driver kept her posture relaxed, one hand on the wheel, the other dangling casually. The police car didn't move, didn't approach, didn't even acknowledge the Israelis. But moments later, barely 20 meters past the roundabout, another patrol car turned onto the street behind them. Keela's heart rate spiked. Barak didn't blink. "Maintain speed," he whispered. They did. The patrol car followed for half a block, a full block, 2 blocks. Tension filled the air like static, and then the patrol car turned right at the next intersection, sirens off, attention pulled elsewhere. Keela exhaled and wiped sweat from her brow. Team Beta reached the Corniche and drove along the waterfront road. The Mediterranean stretched black and vast to their right. The glowing hotels and apartment towers of Beirut rose to their left. They passed a doorman sweeping cigarette butts off the sidewalk. He barely looked up. They passed a taxi dropping off a couple holding hands. They passed an open-air cafe where men smoked nargileh, their eyes glued to a late-night soccer match on a flickering television. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But behind them, deep inside the city, the first hints of chaos were blooming. At 2:06 a.m., Team Gamma was the first to reach the extraction point. The beach was dimly lit, wind brushing across the sand. A pair of Lebanese fishermen sat farther down the shore, half asleep beside their small boat, lantern flickering weakly. The Israelis walked calmly, and then, once out of sight, sprinted toward the water. Shayatet 13 divers emerged like sea creatures rising from the deep, helping pull the commandos into inflatable craft. Weapons were resecured, radios checked. The boats began moving silently toward the waiting missile ships farther offshore. Team Beta arrived minutes later, Team Alpha shortly after. As Barak waded into the cold surf, he finally peeled off his wig and threw it into the water. One of the naval commandos smirked. "Back to normal, sir," Barak shrugged. "Normal is relative." The final extraction boat drifted away from the shore just as the distant wail of alarms reached the beach. Lebanon had realized something was wrong, but the Israelis were already gone, melting back into the Mediterranean, leaving behind footsteps that the waves quickly erased. When the last commandos boarded the missile boats, the engines roared to life. The ships sped across the dark water at breakneck speed, slicing through waves like arrows. Behind them, Beirut glowed in the distance, lights shimmering obliviously. Inside the boats, the commandos sat in silence. Some shivered from the cold. Some finally let out breaths they had held for too long. Some stared at nothing, simply absorbing the reality. They had just struck the heart of Beirut and escaped. Hours later, when the first reports hit Lebanese radio, confusion ruled the narrative. Officials claimed Zionist agents had infiltrated the capital. Palestinian leaders were furious and in disbelief. Militia commanders demanded answers. Foreign journalists scrambled for scraps of information. But by the time Lebanese police surrounded the 3 apartments, the Israelis were already safely back in Haifa. By dawn, the bodies of Adwan, Nasser, and Youssef were photographed by dozens of reporters. Journalists described the attacks as unprecedented, impossible, and a direct humiliation to Beirut. Within Israel, the news spread quietly at first, then rapidly. Families of the Munich victims felt a solemn sense of justice. Military leaders felt pride mixed with relief that the mission incurred minimal casualties. Golda Meir received the early morning call confirming success. She hung up the phone, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Let them know we keep our promises." Beirut awoke to chaos. Before sunrise, rumors spread like wildfire. 3 high-ranking Palestinian leaders had been assassinated in their beds inside the capital, under the supposed protection of Beirut's dense political jungle. Panic and disbelief rippled through the city as security forces scrambled to comprehend what had happened. Word reached the PLO headquarters before the Lebanese police had even finished securing the crime scenes. Yasser Arafat himself was jolted awake in his apartment on Rue Clichy, the urgency in his aide's trembling voice unmistakable. "Abu Ammar, it's them, it's Israel, they were here." Arafat stared, unblinking, the weight of the moment settling around him like an anchor dropped into the depths of the sea. "Impossible," he whispered at first. "No one can operate like that in Beirut." But he knew. Deep down, he knew exactly what kind of enemy Israel was. Relentless, precise, merciless when necessary. He rushed to the first scene, the apartment of Kamal Nasser, the poet, the voice of their cause, the man whose speeches stirred thousands. Arafat entered the dimly lit room and froze. Nasser lay on the floor, a thin stream of dried blood marking the spot where the bullet had entered. His hands were folded near his chest, as if in the middle of forming words that would now never be spoken. His typewriter sat on the desk, a half-finished sentence still waiting in the carriage. Arafat's breath trembled. "Kamal, what have they done?" The room was silent except for the click of cameras as journalists hurried to capture the scene. The photos would be on front pages around the world before the day ended. Arafat moved to the window and saw residents gathered outside. Some angry, some terrified, some simply confused. A city violated, a sanctuary breached. Beirut had been penetrated. The message was brutal and unmistakable. Lebanese authorities tried to contain the embarrassment, but it was impossible. By 7 a.m., Western news agencies were broadcasting the story. Israeli commandos infiltrate Beirut, 3 PLO leaders killed. CNN and BBC reporters interviewed neighbors who claimed they saw men disguised in wigs. Others swore they saw European tourists calmly walking away from the scene moments after gunshots. Details blurred into myth within hours. The Lebanese government, already fractured by internal tensions, reacted with fury. The Prime Minister convened an emergency session. The army was ordered to raise alert levels. Security checkpoints multiplied overnight. Militia factions blamed each other before uniting in a rare moment of shared humiliation. But the truth was undeniable. Israel had displayed a level of operational reach no one believed possible. Not the PLO, not Lebanon, not even Israel's own allies. For years to come, Beirut would remember the night the city slept while Israeli commandos walked its streets. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the return journey was filled with quiet reflection. As the missile boat sped toward Haifa, dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the Mediterranean in streaks of pale blue and gold. Inside the vessel, Barak finally removed the last traces of his disguise. His wig lay discarded on the floor. His dress, soaked and torn, hung loosely around his compact body. He looked less like the glamorous woman he had pretended to be and more like a weathered soldier who had just shouldered the weight of history. Mookie Betzer slumped beside him, wiping seawater and sweat from his brow. "You think they understood?" Betzer muttered. Barak raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "The ones we went for. The ones still alive." Barak took a long moment before responding. "They will now." Betzer nodded, not out of satisfaction, but out of understanding. The mission wasn't about victory. It wasn't even about retaliation. It was about sending a message written in the only language their adversaries respected: consequences. When the boats docked, there was no cheering crowd, no ceremony, no speeches. The entire operation remained classified. The returning soldiers stepped onto the pier in exhausted silence, greeted only by a handful of senior officers and intelligence chiefs. A medic looked each man over quickly, checking for cuts, dehydration, hypothermia. Even minor injuries were recorded meticulously. They checked weapons, gear, and documentation gathered from Beirut. Some of the materials were whisked away by intelligence analysts who had waited all night for their arrival. Golda Meir did not meet them at the pier. She rarely met soldiers returning from secret missions, but she issued a short message through the chief of staff. "Tell them they have given Israel a sound night's sleep." Across Israel, whispers of the mission spread faster than official statements. Newspapers published vague references to an extraordinary military success. Radio broadcasters hinted at strategic accomplishments without providing details. The Israeli public, still traumatized by Munich, felt a mixture of pride and relief. But within military headquarters, the emotion was more subdued. Victory came at a cost. Not in lives, not this time, but in the intensifying cycle of conflict. Every assassination, every strike, every targeted raid created ripples across the region, ripples that sometimes swelled into waves of retaliation. And everyone understood. The PLO would answer. Israeli airports increased security. Diplomatic missions were warned of possible reprisal attempts. Civilian centers were placed on heightened alert. Operation Spring of Youth had struck at the heart of the enemy. But the heart, once pierced, does not bleed quietly. Back in Beirut, the funerals unfolded with enormous crowds. Tens of thousands marched through the streets, lifting coffins draped in Palestinian flags. Gunmen fired volleys of bullets into the air. Women wailed. Men shouted for vengeance. Arafat delivered a fiery eulogy, equal parts sorrow and fury. "They struck us where we believed we were safe. They entered our homes with impunity. But this blood will not be the last spilled in this struggle." His words ignited a collective anger. Within hours, militant factions were already planning counterattacks. Black September operatives across Europe received encrypted instructions. Lebanese militias prepared ambushes near the border. The spiral continued. But even as retaliatory plans took shape, the PLO's operational structure was left stunned, hollowed, destabilized. The loss of Nasser, Adwan, and Youssef was not symbolic, it was strategic. These men had real influence, real operational weight. Their absence left a vacuum that would take years to refill. It wasn't just leadership that had been struck, it was confidence. Beirut, once considered untouchable, had been breached with terrifying ease. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, the final intelligence debriefings took place. Barak and Betzer sat with generals mapping out every second of the operation. What went right, what almost failed, what needed revision for future missions. The analysts listened, wide-eyed, taking furious notes. One general leaned forward. "Would it have worked if even one guard had been awake?" he asked. Barak didn't hesitate. "No. If one element faltered, the entire structure collapsed." "And yet it didn't," the general replied, almost in disbelief. Barak shrugged. "That's the nature of these operations. You prepare until luck becomes unnecessary." Across the room, a Mossad commander added, "And sometimes you prepare so well that even luck is afraid to intervene." Everyone laughed, just briefly, because beneath the humor lay the truth they all understood. Operation Spring of Youth had been a masterpiece, but masterpieces are rare and dangerous. Far from the headquarters, in a small apartment in Jerusalem, the mother of one of the murdered Munich athletes lit a candle as she listened to the morning news. She didn't know the details. She didn't know the names of the commandos. She didn't even know what city Israel had struck. But when the announcer spoke of Israel delivering justice for Munich, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Her words traveled nowhere. They reached no official, no commander, no soldier, but they were enough. Because sometimes justice doesn't need applause. Sometimes it only needs to be felt. Dawn broke over Beirut like a confession. Light spilled across the rooftops, exposing the scars left behind from the night's unseen war. Police cruisers blocked off sections of Verdun and Hamra. Soldiers cordoned off sidewalks with tape. Journalists flocked like birds toward the three crime scenes, their cameras clicking in rapid bursts. What they found was unlike anything Lebanon had seen before. Inside the first apartment, Abu Youssef lay motionless on the floor of his bedroom, his documents scattered around him like fallen leaves. His wife sat trembling in the corner as officers questioned her. She kept repeating, "They came from nowhere. They came like ghosts." At the second site, Kamal Adwan's apartment was filled with intelligence officers whispering urgently as they rummaged through drawers. They discovered maps, coded notebooks, training schedules, and correspondence with militants across the Middle East. "Whoever did this," one officer muttered, "knew exactly what they were looking for." And in the third apartment, friends of the slain poet Kamal Nasser gathered around his body, weeping. His typewriter, still holding the unfinished sentence from the night before, seemed to echo the tragedy more eloquently than any eulogy could. All three apartments told the same story: precision, professionalism, a terrifying level of access and confidence. Lebanon hadn't been infiltrated, it had been penetrated with surgical skill, and the wound was deep. By mid-morning, international headlines dominated television broadcasts. Israeli commandos strike in Beirut. 3 PLO leaders assassinated. Unprecedented breach of Lebanese security. CNN reporters speculated about the identities of the operatives. British newspapers described it as audacious, flawless, unthinkable. Arab outlets called it a violation of sovereignty and an insult that must be avenged. The world wasn't just shocked, it was stunned. Beirut, the city known as the Paris of the Middle East, the jewel of the Levant, had been infiltrated without warning. No shootout in the streets, no alarms blaring, no visible Israeli presence, only the aftermath. Every newspaper photograph captured the same uneasy truth. Israel had proven it could reach anywhere. Inside Israel, the atmosphere was far quieter. At IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, the commandos who executed the mission sat in a closed debriefing room with the chief of staff, intelligence advisors, and Mossad directors. Charts covered the walls. A large map of Beirut sat spread across the table. Barak, still exhausted from the night's ordeal, stood as he was asked to walk through the timeline step by step. His voice was low but clear. "The first guard went down silently," he began. "Second one tried to reach for his weapon, but we neutralized him before he could shout. We entered Youssef's apartment at exactly 1:13. Confirmed target within 5 seconds. Every detail mattered. The analysts asked about unexpected obstacles. The deputy chief asked about police patrol patterns. A Mossad officer asked about the guards' reactions. Barak answered everything with cool, clinical precision. When it was Betzer's turn, he described the route to Adwan's apartment. "The stairwell was tight," he explained. 2 doors on the landing, one ajar. We had to move carefully. Adwan was awake. He sensed us. We engaged immediately. The analysts circled notes, asked follow-up questions, mapped possible patterns. It wasn't celebration. It was study, dissection, learning, because even success needed improvement. The meeting continued for hours. Only when every detail had been reviewed and every mistake cataloged did the chief of staff finally address the room. "The nation may never know your names," he said, "but it will feel the security you have given it." The soldiers nodded, not out of pride, but out of understanding. Their victory belonged to their country, not to themselves. Across Israel, news of the mission spread quietly at first. Early morning radio hosts hinted at a significant security operation. Newspapers printed phrases like "a bold response" and "a message sent." By afternoon, those hints became confirmations. Families gathered in living rooms, leaning close to radios as broadcasters delivered the details. 3 key Palestinian militants eliminated operation reportedly carried out inside Beirut. Israeli soldiers safely returned. Parents hugged their children tighter. Elderly citizens wiped tears of solemn satisfaction. Survivors of terror attacks felt a momentary relief, small but meaningful. At the Munich Victims' Memorial in Tel Aviv, visitors placed fresh flowers at the site. Some lit candles. One man stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the names engraved on the plaque. "They didn't die unnoticed," he whispered. "Someone answered for them, but justice is never without consequences, and no operation, no matter how precise, can guarantee peace." The retaliation began almost immediately. Across Lebanon, militia groups tightened security, accusing the government of incompetence. Palestinian factions moved leaders into underground compounds. Meetings that once took place in apartments now occurred in bunkers. Black September operatives mobilized in Europe, planning reprisals against Israeli targets. Assassination lists circulated quietly among extremist cells. Mossad agents in Rome, Athens, and Paris received urgent alerts. Israel braced for the blow. And yet, even as threats multiplied, Operation Spring of Youth had a profound effect on the regional power dynamic. For Israel's enemies, fear settled in. For Israel's allies, respect deepened. For Israel's citizens, hope flickered anew. The message was not subtle. You may strike us, but we will reach you, wherever you hide, whatever walls you believe protect you. In Beirut, the funerals of Nasser, Adwan, and Youssef turned into massive public demonstrations. Tens of thousands marched through the streets, chanting slogans, raising flags, vowing revenge. The air was thick with gunpowder as militants fired rounds into the sky. Speakers shouted about sovereignty, resistance, and revenge. And standing at the center of it all was Yasser Arafat. He delivered a speech filled with rage, sorrow, and defiance. His voice shook as he said, "They crossed our streets, they entered our homes. They killed our brothers in their beds. We will answer, and the world will know we are not afraid." The crowd roared, emotion surged, anger mounted, the conflict deepened. But beneath the fury, something else existed, something quieter, more private. Fear. The Palestinians had believed Beirut was safe. Now they knew it wasn't. Weeks later, long after the smoke of that night had cleared, an old Lebanese fisherman sat along the shoreline where the Israelis had emerged from the sea. He often told the story. "I thought I saw shadows that night," he would say. "Figures rising from the water like spirits. I thought maybe it was my tired eyes. But now I know." He'd look out at the horizon, shaking his head slowly. "They came from the sea, and the city never even noticed." As for the commandos, their names would remain hidden for years. Their roles classified, their deeds known only through whispers and unofficial accounts. Some continued serving, some moved up the ranks, some quietly retired. Ehud Barak would go on to become one of Israel's most prominent leaders, a prime minister, a defense minister, a symbolic representation of the nation's fierceness and fragility. But in interviews decades later, when asked about Spring of Youth, he never romanticized it, he never bragged, he never turned it into legend. He would only say, "It was necessary, it was dangerous, and it was done." History records battles. It records victories and defeats. It records the movements of armies and the speeches of leaders. But sometimes history is shaped in the shadows, in silent stairwells at 1 a.m., in the muffled breath of a disguised commando, in the quiet splash of swimmers approaching an enemy shore. Operation Spring of Youth was one of those moments, a mission that reached across the sea to deliver justice for Munich, a mission that reshaped the meaning of Israeli resolve, a mission that reminded the world Israel may be small, but its memory is long, and its reach, when pushed, extends wherever it must. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue joining us in exploring these secret special operations, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes.